Okay. You know, make sure you turn on what are you on, an iPad or computer? Okay, I know when it pops up, you have to go up the top and turn the video on. Well, the first thing it may ask you is if you're using this over internet, which you are. Hit yes or hit that button. And then go to
here comes our guy from Kenya.
Yeah, we got a few guys getting on now. That's what he just said. He got a guy from Kenya getting on. Okay, you're getting on then. So, hey, turn your video on and turn your let's see. We try to keep the speakers off unless you want to say something. You may have to hit your speaker on or off. That keeps the background noise out from your dog barking or a door slamming or a telephone ringing. Yeah. So the speaker should be at the top.
You know, this is our 5th year doing this. Terry is not getting any better looking.
That would get better looking. How about that? Can you see a picture of Kevin? Okay, well you're on. You're on. Let's get started. Let's get
Ask him if he can hear you talking, Terry.
What'd you say, Joe?
Ask him if he can hear you talking.
Can you hear me talking through the iPad, Dan? Do I now? Okay, not now, but I went in the other room. You should be okay. I said, let's start here, and if you don't feel like you're completely in, just call me back. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
You got Alfred on from Kenya?
Yeah, I let him in.
Okay.
Hello, Corey.
Corey's probably not got his microphone turned on.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
There you go.
Good.
Good.
You guys staying busy?
Yeah, we've been hauling some litter, but we got some rain last night, so that put us just hanging around today. Probably start back me.
Yeah, we've been laying tile. They were calling for pretty heavy rain, which we did get an inch Saturday, but of rain there. But the field we were tiling in, we tiled till we got done at 6 o'clock Saturday morning. But I tell you what, we were down in the river bottom, and we laid an 18-inch main, and we were down 12 feet in the river bottom and never hit water.
Good gracious.
So yeah, we were about as dry as we've ever been in this area this late in the year. Not that I'm complaining, you know, but just because if it had been a typical year, you know, we couldn't have tiled that. We ended up getting about 100 acres. We tiled on 25-foot centers, got that done. So pretty happy with that.
Yeah. Good deal. Good deal.
But I'm glad it's rain. I'm tired of work and I'm ready to relax for a month or two.
I know what you mean.
But I'll tell you what, it's amazing. You never have a big enough tractor to pull a tile plow. You know, we got the
green one to pull it through there. You just need
green one. I don't even know how to answer that, Terry.
Just to make fun of you. I just try to get you back for all the times you get me.
Oh, don't worry. I got a few slurs in there for you.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yep. We're getting pretty close to Joe. You got any more wanting in?
So far, we got 18 in.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. They can join in whenever then.
Yeah.
So first
So
thing I
tell-
want to say is thanks guys for joining us again. This is another year. Time flies by. For you new guys, kind of excited. We here in Du Bois, where I'm at, we kind of had a rough year. We got hit with a tornado. I had a bunch of plots out this year that, I mean, in one field we had 43 different trials that we did, and Mother Nature kind of skewed that big plot data just from the down corn. So we still have a few new plots that we did that wasn't too bad on wind damage. But kind of excited what we seen. We'll go through kind of our program a little bit and just see that every year, even us, we've been doing this for, I don't know, 15, 16 years, and we're still tweaking my program that I do on our farm. So, with technology changing year after year, even us, we don't settle. What we think is good. There's always improvement on it, but I think this year, starting out, guys, we're going to get back more to the basics in this group. We're finding out that we are overseeing the basics in agriculture as far as the agronomy part. We got to get their soils balanced before any program really works. Now there's things that we'll teach that will help on that, but the main thing is, we got to get, our pHs neutral. We've, in my thinking and going off of yield data over the years on our farm, and the guys that's been the prior years of the MACC group, kind of prove what we're teaching is kind of against what most universities and some of the experts are saying on base saturations. In this school here, we don't really care. I mean, I really don't care what our soil nutrient levels are. I know that goes against everybody. They want to have such high P and K, nutrient levels, but that's why we feed the plant, not the soil, as far as the fertility. We feel that the way we do it with the wide drops and the 2x2 with the planter, we don't think you can get much more efficient by feeding what the plant needs instead of the old adage of throwing out 200-300 pounds of potash or DAP or MAP or whatever for the phosphorus. Because the problem with that is, guys, we'll get into some of our soil samples too and prove our point. Just because it's in the soil does not mean the plant is getting it. And that's what I always gripe about. Everybody gets too tied up about what the soil samples as far as nutrients say. Most of that stuff is tied up that can't be released for the plant to uptake. So, our train of thought is a little different. Once it's in the plant, most of the time, that's going to represent yield. So, we'll have to get you guys thinking about that. We really focus on soil biology. When you get through this class, you'll see exactly why we do what we do. I mean, we know we bank yield to soil biology, and we'll have Dr. Cassidy on here talking about the biology on it, the soil, because that's what we 100% focus our yield on. Everything that we apply, we think about the soil as far as the microbes, how we're being detrimental to it, and the reason why we're not a big fan of dry fertilizers, because most of fertilizers that are dry is loaded with salts. Not saying that liquid don't have salts, but at least we can treat it with a humic. Every ounce of fertilizer that we put in the ground, we get a treat with humics. And you'll hear we'll talk a lot about humics and sugars. Now we're going to be talking about some algae that we're really excited about to help feed the biology. So let's go ahead and get started a little bit. We're 20-some-time national winner. I don't know how many times it is, but when we started this program, guys, we had 1 or 2 fields on our whole farm that we actually pulled contests from. That was actually good enough. And now we've been running this program for, like I said, 15, 16, 17 years now. And now basically if it's a bottom, river bottom or a creek bottom now, we have the ground is good enough now, the soil's good enough now that we could pull basically an NCGA off of anything. Just like this year, a tornado went through, wiped out basically all of our last 6 or 7 years NCGA fields. So we had to pick 3 or 4 different fields, and lo and behold, we still were able to do really good in the contest. We don't know if we placed or not, but we had some of our farm's highest yields this year, and it was on different fields that we haven't pulled before. So we know the program works. We want you to try to be as close as you can to the program. Like I said, there's reasons why we use what we do, what products we use, the timing. There's reasons why we use the timing. We get into the soils, and you will be able to see we got a couple of guys that's been in the program 4 or 5 years. Maybe after dinner, 1 or 2 of them guys are going to get on and talk and see what they're seeing. The contest is fine and dandy, it's whatever, but the main thing is what we see across the whole farm. That's what makes us money. And that's kind of what them guys are going to be talking a little bit, what they're seeing and seeing in their production on their acres. So, but anyway, the MACC is developed to teach farmers to increase corn and soybean yields on the farms, but do it economically. I mean, we talk really big about pulling tissue samples. To me, that's, there may be better ways out there. But, once you get 3 or 4 years under your belt, to me, with us being on the tissue sampling, I feel like it's the best for us just because we track our weather, we track our nutrient levels, and most of the time when we get into June, middle of June, right before we get into tassel, unless we have a detrimental weather event, we can pretty well predict. Now the hybrids are changing, getting better and better, but we can pretty well predict our nutrient levels by the previous years within 15 or 20 bushel what our corn's going to make by June. So if you sit there and you think about a marketing thing, how nice that would be able to market your corn and know what kind of crop you're going to have by June, knowing that you could catch some of them highs and lows and be within 10 or 15 bushel of what your crop's going to make. So that's another big thing here. This MACC group, I do have to brag about it. We got the best farmers in the world, without a doubt, in my opinion, in this group. And the great thing about it is, not everybody has my soil type, has my litter, has this and that, but every one of the farmers are more than happy to tell what they're seeing, what's working for them. And I think that's a big key to the success of this group, that, every farmer is more than happy to talk about it. So anyway, Joe, let's go ahead and get started on this.
Just a minute, Kevin. Let's tell them here just a little bit now. Most of you've got a chat box in your computer or in your iPad, and you can type in questions that you've got along. If you don't want to turn your microphone on and ask it, we do encourage people to talk during the meetings. So if you've got a question somewhere along, feel free to, like I said, put it in the chat box or ask it live. So again, I'm Terry Vissing, and hopefully some of you've seen me through the recruitment of it, and welcome you guys, the new ones this year, and we'll just get started here.
Yeah, you guys may not have seen Terry, but I'm sure you've heard Terry before.
You're a good one to talk to me.
No, but so some of you guys, I don't know, all you guys, I don't know your farming background, this and that, but we talk heavily about salts. And what got me concerned about salts was back in the day, I used to be a roughneck on a drilling rig. And the interesting thing is, if we ever had a saltwater spill from the gas or the oil, we noticed that there wasn't any weeds growing around. Not even water hemp would grow in it. So I just kind of made me, in the back of my mind, always stuck out how detrimental salt is. If you can't even get water hemp to grow through salt or through the salt spill. And you think about Roundup or these other products, you sit there and see how much salt is in. I think Roundup has maybe 4 pounds of salt per gallon that's in it. It's something like that. But salt is not a good thing in soil. It's so detrimental to the biology. It kills, it sterilizes a lot of things. So this is just a little chart here to show you how much salt is in. This is just the nitrogen. I don't know if Joe has the potash loads in it, but it's extremely high.
Yeah, the murate on the bottom is
there. It is. Yeah. So I mean, 60% of it's basically chloride, salt. So that's part of the reason that I'm not a fan of dry fertilizer, especially the P and K, just because of salt loads. And then you think about what's actually available. The potash don't really move in the plant, gets tied up, or move in the soil, gets tied up. But if you throw 300 pounds of potash out, guys, here's what's really scary about it. Do you guys know how many pounds are actually available to the plant? Anybody take a guess out of 300 pounds? So I'll make this quick. So let's give the benefit of the doubt. If everybody's planting on 30-inch rows, let's say your roots on a corn plant go out 5 inches each way. So you're using a third of the 30-inch rows. So if potash don't move in the soil, so if you're putting 300 pounds out and only about a third of that is getting to the plant, so 300 divided by 3 would be 100. But the problem is it's only 60% salt. So 60% is available, 60. So you're at actually 180, and divide that by 3, so you're down to 60 pounds. And the problem is there's only like 7 to 10% of that is available to the plant. So out of that 300 actual pounds you're putting out, you're only getting about 10 pounds out of that 300 pounds of potash product that you're putting out that's available to the plant. So when guys sit there and say that's not enough, what we're doing with liquid, I'm like, well, do the math. We're actually getting more through the liquid program with less salt that becomes more available to the plant than what your 300 pounds of potash is. And how many of you guys have had tissue samples that's pulled year after year and your potash levels are low? Everybody should be raising their hands, because I don't know of anybody that has used dry fertilizer that's had really good tissue samples using potash. So everybody should be raising their hands, saying they can't fix it with potash. But how many guys go out and try to raise, or their co-ops tell them, well, you need to put more out there, more out there, more out there, and you turn around and get the same results, or actually go backwards? You know, I've seen it, done it. I mean, I've not done it. I mean, we've not had dry fertilizer on our farm since I've been farming on my own, and that's been since 1996, 97, I think I was farming on my own. So, you know, there is a problem with dry fertilizer. I mean, it's just not available. It's a salt, it's a rock. You need moisture. So the drier the year, the harder it is to get dry fertilizer into the plant. You know, I'm just not a big fan, and never have been a big fan of dry fertilizer. So, all right, let's go ahead to the next one. If we got any questions. So, you know, every nutrient has an antagonist with it. And this year we've been seeing this for last several years. You know, actually I had an issue first time I ever tried it. I thought, well, you know, normally when I'd go out and try to add more nitrogen, I'm sitting there thinking my last Y drop, I still got like 2,000 GDUs for my corn crop to finish up, because normally we Y drop at that last pass to be at that V10. So we're a little bit of around 1,000 GDUs, a little bit more. But some of our corn takes 3,000 GDUs to finish. So I would go out and add a little bit more nitrogen there, and I'd always see where we would go off the path of what our tissue samples would say, and sit there and think, well, we need more nitrogen there. So we would always add a little bit more nitrogen at the end on that last Y drop, and our yields would be down. So this year I went out and made a few strips on my first Y drop and raised that number. I ran like, I'm trying to think here. We ran, instead of a 20-gallon shot of nitrogen, we ran a 40-gallon shot. And lo and behold, our tissue samples from there all the way to black layer never caught back up to where we stayed with our normal program. And when I say our tissue samples never caught up, not just the nitrogen, it was zinc, it was boron, it was manganese, sulfur, P and K, every nutrient that we had on that chart never ever got back to where we stayed at our balanced diet of 20 gallon on our first Y drop. So we're seeing that over applying nitrogen is just as bad as under applying nitrogen. So, you know, we, like on our contest stuff, you know, we're at 180 units total nitrogen growing 400 plus bushel corn. Now, I'm not saying that you guys can go to that level yet, but what we're seeing is when we're going above that rate, because we're Y dropping, so everything's getting concentrated in that band. So if you're putting, you know, if you're Y dropping and you're growing 230, 40 bushel corn, and you're throwing 200 plus pounds of nitrogen out there, chances are you're probably overfeeding that plant and that biology on there, and that's probably costing you bushels. And that's why we're saying you need to pull tissue samples every week to monitor your levels, and then you will know. You won't have to second guess. You won't have to do any of that. The plant will tell you if it's getting too much or not enough. But we talk a lot about calcium. Calcium is a huge nutrient. Don't get enough respect. You know, when we talk about soil samples, base saturations, we want to see high calcium. Our numbers are a lot different than what the universities say. We'll get to the levels when we get to talking about soils and the magnesium. I don't want to see high magnesium in the plant or in the soil. There's several reasons why we don't want to see high calcium or high magnesium. It's on compaction in the soil, makes it tighter, makes it harder to dry out, just makes everything roots harder to dig. If it's hard for you to dig roots, it's hard for them roots to get through the soil. Where the high calcium will make the ground a lot more porous, let oxygen get in the soil, let it dry out quicker, and help root development. So just a few of them that we talk about right now until we dive in deep into the nutrients once we get into soil samples and tissue samples. But any questions yet?
Kevin, there on that chart, and yes, we'll get into it, but you see where that magnesium is really high and nitrogen happens to be really high, then it's blocking both of those same nutrients, calcium and potassium, from getting in the plant.
Yeah. I mean,
it's fighting that. Yeah.
I mean, and once we get into soil sample, we'll talk about that. I'd rather see guys have a balanced tissue sample than having nutrients out of whack. And we'll get into the ratios that we want to see here, but a lot of guys want to go out and gain yield by throwing a bunch of nitrogen out. And how many guys have tried to gain yield by throwing a bunch more nitrogen out? Everybody should be raising their hand saying they did it because, we used to try that, and we didn't, and nitrogen was not the limiting factor. Most guys have enough nitrogen out there to grow 300 bushel corn consistently with the program that they're running. It's the other nutrients and the balances that they don't have in line. And we'll kind of help on that and give you ideas where we want to be at on them numbers and the ratios. But here's something interesting. Most guys know this, but but you look at some of the hardest nutrients to get in a plant, phosphorus and potassium. Most guys will say that those are what we've seen through the years on the tissue samples. Those are definitely the two hardest ones to get into the plant, especially the potassium one. And I think a lot of that has to do with the mag in their soils. I think it has a lot to do with the form fertilizer that they're using. And they're probably not using enough sugars or humics or sugars, humics, or fulvics to help drive that in. I mean, the older generation used to say that humics were for soil, and humics 100% were, and the fulvics were for foliar. But we're actually seeing where we're using fulvics now in the soil that is helping drive our tissue samples up. So guys that's got really high magnesium levels, the humics and the fulvics are definitely got to be a big player on your farm, just because it's so hard to move nutrients in a high mag soils. So, but there's not really a whole lot of nutrients that are mobile, as you can see on that picture. But anyway, any questions yet? All right. So here's things that we want to get to the base thing. So guys, we got to get our pH balance. That's the first thing we need to be spending money on. I would just assume you guys cut back on your fertility from your program and spend it on lime. Preferably if you have to lime, run a high cal lime. Stay away from high mag lime, unless you're down to your base saturations of calcium or are like 95 or 92 and above, I would say. And then you might throw a little mag in there, but I don't know too many guys that have base saturations of calcium that high. So, pH has got to be balanced. I mean, we try to start either at 7, no lower than 6, 8 at the beginning of the year, because naturally through the growing season, once you get into around tassel time, our soils will drop about 0.2 to 0.3, going to the acidic side. So, when we're at tasseling, we're probably between that 6.6, excuse me, that 6.6, 6.5, 6.6 to 6.7 on our pH. And that seems to be the sweet spot to releasing, to be a balance, to release all the nutrients about as equally as what it can be. But like I said, the main thing is, guys, we got to do that first. We got to get our soils, pH balanced first. That's got to be the first thing. Organic matter, I will tell you this. Organic matter is really nice to have, but it is harder to, how do I say this? It's cheaper to grow a good crop, but it's way harder to grow extreme corn on high organic soils. You look at the world records, where are most of the world records set at? Very low organic matter, low CECs. And the reason is the nutrients don't get tied up in the soil, kind of like the heavier soils in the Midwest do. So, it's a tit for tat, I guess that's what the saying is. Or I'm not, organic matter is definitely a good thing because you don't have to spend near as much on it, feeding a crop to grow a good crop. But just remember, it is a lot harder to grow the extreme high yields with that high organic matter. CECs, like I said, same thing. The heavier the soils are, the harder it is to move nutrients. You have to, guys, it's got CECs above 20. I really don't know if you have to use much humics. I think I'd be running mostly fulvics just because it's tied up with that heavy soil. You got a pretty good holding capacity on it. You're looking for something more to drive the nutrients into the plant. Guys with low CEC should be using more humics to kind of help stabilize the nutrients that you put out there in the soil, so they don't move quite as fast through the profile. The base saturations, we'll get into them levels where we want to be at, but it's definitely different from what the universities say. I mean, you got to remember, most of these universities and these other guys, that the universal ratios or whatever was written in the 70s, where they were growing, 130 bushel corn or 110 bushel corn back then. To be fair, we're trying to grow twice, if not 3 times the corn crop what they are. And the technology, everything has changed in life. I mean, the needs of 110, 130 bushel corn are a lot different than the needs are of 250 bushel corn. So I think that's where the universities are behind right there. They need to be redoing stuff themselves and seeing that that's not the levels we want to see, because it just ties too much stuff up being
Kevin,
that high mag. Yeah.
we got a question from Brian in the chat box. So if I soil tested in November, will my pH show lower than if I tested in April?
November. So in November, you will probably be, I got to think here, you will be probably a little bit lower than what you will be in April, meaning you will be a little bit lower. So if April you're at about, say you're at 7 in April, in November, you'll probably show about a 6.8. So that's kind of what we see around here. So it kind of has that trend line. In the spring is normally the most alkaline, I guess that's what you would call it. And then, go through the whole growing season, it gets a little bit more acidic. And then it seems to be about the most acidic for us, which would be around July, toward the middle of July to the end of July. And then we start going the other way. So you're probably still in November. You will probably be a little bit more acidic than what you will be when you get into April. So, so if you're like 6.8, in November, you're going to be fine. I wouldn't mess with it if I'm at 6.8 in November. You know what I'm saying? So at least that is how it is around here. Where are you from? Who was that from, Brian?
Brian, are you the Ontario, Brian?
Brian, I can't hear you. Can you
Yeah,
turn
you
your
have to
volume on?
turn your
Mic on? Okay.
What about now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm from Ontario, Canada. Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, we've been seeing some inconsistencies when I test in November versus if I say I test after the crop and I test before the crop. I go in the same field and I pull tests. So I just wonder kind of what do you want a 6.8 in November or do you want a 6.8 in April?
so around here, like I said, we will normally, probably around March and April is probably when we will be the most alkaline in our area. So you should, and I'm saying so we're probably what, 400 miles south of you, maybe? I don't know, due south.
Yeah,
You're pretty far up there.
I'm
But
actually just north of Ohio, right across from the lake. So I'm as far south in Ontario as you can get.
okay, so you're probably 300 miles then,
Yeah.
instead of 400. But so yeah, I'm kind of guessing. Moisture is going to make a lot of difference in that too. I don't know when you pull them, if you pull them if it was really dry or or if you have a lot of moisture right now when you pull them. But moisture will make a little bit of difference. And we see here when we're a little dry, we actually are a little bit more acidic when we're dry too.
Yeah.
So you can base it off that. I mean, now, guys, I'm not telling you beating your head against the wall and sitting there trying to get every acre that you got exactly at 7. I mean, that's impossible. We don't do that. I mean, we go, there's spots in our farm we're down to, when we're at planting, we're down to 6.6, 6.5. And that's just farming. I mean, you can't control Mother Nature, you can't control the moisture, this and that, but I am telling you, if you're starting out and your pH has a 5 on it in April, starts out with a 5, yeah, you definitely need to be addressing that. That's going to be a big issue on getting nutrients in the plant. So I would 100% be addressing anything that has a, below a 6. You should definitely be for liming whatever it is. That's a must. I mean, I think we got an efficiency chart here that just shows, how once you get down, I think when you get down to 6%, I think you're at 80% efficiency, and then when you get down to 5, I think you're at less than 60% efficiency of your fertilizer. So you think about your fertilizer bill, if you're spending $400 or $500 on fertilizer and you're only getting half the money because you're only able to get half of it into the plant or move through the soil, it kind of makes that liming bill a little bit cheaper, because you already paid for some of that fertilizer. You're just trying to release it. So, but pH is big. And I will say this too, guys. I don't know where you know, some of you guys may be in the dry lands, you know, that don't get a whole lot of rain. But honest to God, the biggest yield benefit that we've ever done, and it's year after year, is laying tile. You know, this year we had 2 really dry spells on our farm. Right after planting, from basically the big part of our corn crop went about 6-7 weeks on like little over half inch of rain. And then once we got into right after the tornado moved through, which was August 7th and 8th, we went basically from August 8th all the way through the rest of the month of August and into September with really no rain to account for anything. But it was amazing where we laid tile. You know, like I said, we're on 25-foot centers, but we could actually see the corn have waves every 25 feet. And it's just about getting oxygen in the soil, even on a dry year. So, so guys, if you are a little wet, now I'm not saying you have to lay a 25 foot every 25 foot, but laying tile, you will see a benefit of that. And every year, I mean, yes, we have our own plow, but we figure we get a return on our investment in less than 3 years on the tile. You know, if it's 2 or 3 wet years, we'll pay for it in 2 years, just because of the biology and the crop. Because, you know, when they go anaerobic, it's not when it dries out and all of a sudden, boom, your biology cranks right back up the next day. I mean, if you're saturated for 2 or 3 weeks, and Cassidy will be on here, and she knows way more about that biology stuff than what we do. But you know, it's just not flipping a switch and boom, all of a sudden your biology back to wide open again. It does take time. And I'm just telling you, we correlate 100% of our yield to what our soil biology is. And that's why we are so successful, I think, is, you know, we're tiling, we're doing stuff that to help all the biology that we can to thrive. But anyway, you know, like I said, I talk about the levels a little bit of the P and K, and I got a farm we'll get into after dinner. We had several guys, you know, was wanting us, because we do have manure on our farm. You know, we raise our own livestock, turkeys, and a few guys were saying, well, you're achieving these yields with manure. And believe me, manure is the best that you can get, you know, especially our turkey manure. We have such a huge carbon source from our bedding of the shavings. So we went out and rented a farm. Last year was the first year we farmed it. There was the guy that was farming it before, organic farmed, and you know the levels were. Well, let me look here. There wasn't on this 230 acre plot. There was not a soil sample on the whole 230 acres that had P. For phosphorus, the highest number was 50, and the K, the highest was 80. And we were actually able to turn in an NCGA this year off that farm of 341 bushel corn. First year farming it, and it had 0 manure on it. So, so manure definitely helps, but there are ways to get around the manure effects, and we'll get into exactly how I treated that crop after dinner. But all right, Joe. Yeah, here we go. This is what I was saying about being neat. How important it is to have your pH balanced. I mean, you sitting there, when you get down that 5.5, I mean, that's pretty detrimental. You know, if you, like I said, if you're spending 500, 400, 500 bucks on fertilizer, you know, you just basically wasted half of it. You know, that it's not going to get into that plant just because of your pH. So balancing your your pH has got to be the number one thing we got to do. And I don't care what program you run, that has to be done. Now, the banding is definitely going to help, our program. And if you strip till or you run the Y drops or whatever, that's probably going to mitigate a little bit on that, but it's still, you're not being 100% efficient. I mean, if we're spending money, we want to try to be as efficient as what we can for the dollars that we spend. So, guys, first thing you got to do is balance your pH. Okay. Number one thing, biology. If you guys have ever heard me talk about anything growing corn or soybeans or anything, it's getting to be more and more every year. We know this is 100% true. We base 100% of our yield on to what kind of soil biology has. And you say, well, weather has a huge part, which it does. I'm not arguing that. But I will just look at our neighbors, and they've had manure too forever in our area. We're turkey houses, chicken houses on every hill in our area. But, we're consistently 70, 80, 90 bushel better than our neighbors. And most of the neighbors are dry fertilizers, one and done guys. Don't protect the crop, don't feed the crop, don't pull soil samples, don't pull tissue samples. But what also is the neat thing is we're doing this on probably a third less nitrogen than what they're using. Yes, now granted, we have got to make more trips. We are spending more money on boron, manganese, all the other micros, because it takes more than N, P, and K to grow a crop. The limiting factor most of the time is not nitrogen. To somewhat it is the P and K, but it's mostly boron. Guys are short on boron, short on manganese. Now, the manganese in them are probably not going to gain you 30, 40 bushels, but if you're saving money on the nitrogen, we say spend it on humics, spend it on sugars, spend it on micros to gain you them few extra bushels. I mean, we have some plots here. We're going to show you of some data. I think, Joe, you got our 2x2, or did I not send that to you? I do have the 2x2, our MACC plots.
No, you didn't.
Got that. Okay, I'll get that to you, or we'll go through that after lunch. I'll find it, try to email or send that to you to put in. I thought I sent that to you back a month ago, but evidently I didn't.
I don't think so.
But we stress biology. I mean, that is the key. That's why we're saying balance your soils. Sugars and humics are your biggest friends in growing a crop. There's so many benefits from the humic acids. Not only buffets the salts, but it helps loosen the soil out. If you guys got high magnesium, we are seeing that it is temporarily, I guess, in season, a quick fix. Now, it's not 100% fix, but it does about the only thing we can do to help combat high mag in season, to lower some of the mag to help free up getting potassium into the plant. But the biology is key. I mean, we talk about biology extremely, extremely a lot. We have my opinion on bugs in a jug. Everybody sells them. I've actually never seen a benefit on my farm, but you got to remember, on my farm, we've had manure, which there's way more bugs in manure than what's in a jug. And we've been away from the salts, the heavy salts, for, like I said, 17, 18, well, since I've been farming, since 96, 97, we've not ran any dry fertilizers on our farm. So our farm is kind of unique. I think that's part of the reason why I don't see a response in them. I think guys that has had high loads of salt over the years, that might be something to quick jumpstart. But Cassidy will talk a little bit about, because we asked her a little bit. We was out at their Phycoterra is a algae growing company to actually start feeding biology, and we were kind of asking a little bit about that. And I think the reason why it don't help on or work on our farm is that it's not, the biology that we're putting in there is not really native to our biology, and I think there's a free for all in it. And well, let's just say strength is in numbers. So I think that's why our normal biology, our native biology, kind of kills the invasive. I guess that's the word I should use, the invasive that we put out there. But like I said, guys that have been using high loads of dry fertilizer, that might be a benefit, until you can get your native biology built up. That's something worth playing with on your farm. But just on our farm, we've not seen it. Not saying that the other guys can't see a benefit from it. But look at some of these numbers here. It's pretty amazing what you got out there. That's crazy what's out in the soil. Just absolutely mind-boggling what you got in there. In 1 acre of soil, there's enough organisms that if weighed would the average or equivalent to the average weight of a cow. That's crazy. I mean, that is a lot of heavy lifting out there that can be done for you, that you don't have to buy fertilizer for. So that's why we're saying, feed the biology, keep it up, keep it healthy, mitigate the damage that you do to it with the heavy salts, humics, sugars, whatever you can do to feed the biology. That's what we're trying to do to become more efficient. Was there a question?
Yeah. Let's see. Do you see that if you are high in magnesium on a soil test, that it is still low in the plant when you tissue test?
So I am lucky. We have naturally low magnesium levels on our farm, and I'm unlike other guys that have consulting. I want to see low in the plant. I feel confident that I have not had any yield drag. Our highest yielding corn ever in the contest have never had a tissue sample above a 0.11 or a 0.10 of mag in the plant on a soil or on a tissue sample. So when I give my tissue samples back, if they would chart it out on colors, it would be red, 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 which I like that, because normally if I got low magnesium in the plant, normally I have high potassium. And like I said, I've grown 400 bushel corn a couple times now, and my magnesium was low in the plant, but my potassium has been high. So I'm thinking of the other guys that I've seen, their soil samples and their tissue samples. Yes, if they are like base saturations like 20%, yes, they will conduce over to their soil or their tissue samples. So they will have high tissue samples. But the problem is, normally when they got high tissue samples of magnesium in the plant, they have low potassium, and that is robbing yield because the potassium is low in the plant. So, like I said, I don't like to see high magnesium in the soil or in the plant for us, because it just ties up the nutrients that I know 100% I see aborting. I see way more yield drag with low potassium than what I do low magnesium in the plant. Did that answer your question? Who was that from?
That was from Jason out in, I believe it was Iowa.
Yeah,
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
So,
thank you for addressing that.
so I mean, honestly, and we've seen, I've seen a buttload of guys in soil samples and tissue samples in the group, my group area all over the United States. And I will just tell you, now the climate does have a little bit to do with it. So what I'm saying is the more heat stress that you have, the more potassium you have to have in the plant. So if you're up north where you don't have as much heat, the potassium is not going to rob as much yield as what guys, down south, like from us down south into Tennessee and Georgia and down there. You better be carrying high potassium in a plant or you're going to be aborting kernels left and right with low potassium. We have not seen now, like I said, I've grown 400 bushel corn twice with tissue samples below 0.11 the whole season on magnesium. But I guarantee you, I cannot grow 400 bushel corn with potassium below 4 the whole season.
Gotcha.
So
it's just a minor factor in yield then, basically the
well,
magnesium.
for what we're seeing, yeah, I mean, to me, yes, I mean, even at now while we're on to this, now part of that is when we have low magnesium, we are on our farm, we're carrying calcium levels above 1 basically the whole year. So when we talk about calcium, and this is why I say it's such an underappreciated nutrient, the higher your calcium is, basically the higher the volume of nutrient flow you have through the plant. And I'm talking all nutrients. Your calcium is like a highway. So if you're below a 0.4 on your calcium, you're probably running a 2-lane dirt road of nutrients in your plant. But if you're above a 1, you're running a 6-lane interstate. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
you're running a lot more volume of nutrients through your plant than what the low calcium numbers are. So what I'm saying is the higher your calcium number is, you can get by with lower numbers across the board, my opinion, on your tissue sample.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. So I think basically that's what I'm saying. I think that's why we can get by, or we are getting by, with the low mag levels, and the plant not showing it, because our calcium is able to move so much more of a volume, even though it's a lower concentration of mag in the plant. We're just moving more of a volume. It's like moving all that through a 6-inch hose instead of a garden hose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard some different analogies about it. Sure.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, our highest yields, I know we're not here to talk about contest corn, but, I don't know how else to use that analogy, but, our highest yields ever have been with extremely low magnesium in the plant. But we have extremely high calcium, we have extremely high potassium in the plant, and phosphorus in the plant. So I don't think, even though the magnesium is the center of the chlorophyll, whatever they talk about, I don't know how low is too low. Maybe if we get down below a 0.08, we start seeing a yield drag. But honest to God, I've not seen a yield drag at 0.10 yet on the magnesium. So I hope that answered your question, what we see. I'd rather see you raise your potassium up and have low magnesium. I'd feel a lot better about that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for addressing it. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Was there another one? I thought there was 2 questions, or not.
I don't think so. Yeah, just that
So
one.
So I mean, yeah, we've been talking about this slide here. I mean, soil health, and when we talk about soil health, I'm not talking about cover crops. I'm not a big cover crop user. Not saying they're bad. Just we don't have time. I mean, we do cover crop some of our hills, but I don't go out and cover crop um, a farm that don't have to be cover crop because of erosion. So the only time I use cover crops is for erosion. Um, no offense for me, I've never seen a yield increase with cover cropping on our farm. Even when we use just to cover crop the rye or wheat on these hills, the problem is we can't get an even stand. It stays wetter when we want to be planting. And no offense, but most of the time when the cover crop's really supposed to help, when we get hot and dry, and we've seen it this year, and even in the soybeans, when the ground is cold, like we had the cover crops in, and the soybeans was a prime example this year, our um, conventional soybeans, even compared to our no-till that was bare soybeans, and to our cover crop soybeans was even worse. When we got that hot dry spot right through June, um, where our conventional soybeans were shaded over, and we plant on 30-inch rows. The conventional beans that we worked, the roots took off because the ground was warmer. The beans were actually shaded over, and they kept growing through that dry spell, where our no-till and our cover crop beans actually were about, I think they were 5 nodes behind. And they, plant structure wise, they were still about 2 weeks behind. Everything was planted at the same time, but the sun was getting down there, so we were drying out the soils, and the roots were not as developed, and the plants actually just stood there and didn't do nothing until we got a rain. So um, so it was kind of eye-opening that even the no-till and the cover crops actually went backwards compared to what the conventional. Now we went to harvest our conventional beans because of tornado, because they were kept growing. They lodged a lot worse, but the yield was still about the same, even with our conventional beans being lodged so bad, just because of we actually had a lot more nodes on our conventional. We ended up having about 7 more nodes through the whole year than what we had on our no-till and our cover crop soybeans. So I'm just saying, for us, don't feel like you have to be a big cover cropper. Not saying it's bad or good or whatever, but basically all of our yields are coming off of ground that don't have cover crop for soil health. I mean, if you cover crop, good for you. If you don't, that's good too. I mean, I have no preference on that for us. But earthworms, earthworms don't like salt. And then even with us conventional tillage, well, we get a crap load of earthworms every year. We don't see I'm not saying we don't hurt the population a little bit when we come through with a ripper every year, but by the springtime, you can't see any more earthworms in our no-till that's been no-tilled year after year, or conventional ground. So that's kind of, I base healthy soil off of yield. I mean, that's what we get paid for. So I think our conventional ground is pretty healthy, pulling yields off like what we do. I mean, we've had, even this year, our conventional farm average was better than our no-till. Now, granted, some of our no-till is on some of our hills, but we do have a contest field where it's in the same creek bottom as what our conventional is. And this is the 12th year in a row that our conventional has whooped our no-till. So, root growth to me, I think, is key. And you got to have oxygen down in there. You got to get rid of that compaction. So let stuff thrive. But any questions? Terry, you're being awfully quiet.
I had a phone call. We might go on, let Cassidy do her presentation. Guys, what we'll do is have her do her presentation, give us a few minutes for questions, and then we'll probably break for lunch right around 12. And with 30 minutes off for lunch. And then we'll get back. So you do what you want to there, Kevin. If you need to bring anything forth before Cassidy starts.
So talk a little bit about Cassidy. So Cassidy has really helped us on understanding, I guess, why we're doing and seeing what we're doing makes sense. Really smart on this biology stuff. So, not throwing a sales pitch out because we said we wasn't going to throw any sales pitch out for anything, but it's pretty neat the product that she's actually sells. But Cassie, it's not a sales pitch. But it's something that we're looking into, maybe feeding the biology a little bit longer than what we have been with the sugars. And when we were out there at Phoenix, she showed a chart of our soil on sugar, and then the chart on the algae that she has. And the neat thing about the algae, it is dead already. So being under a flood can't kill it, make it anaerobic. It's just a food source. So we're still playing with it, but the results that we're seeing on what it's done on the soil as far as feeding the biology and getting the rate up was kind of neat. And we're going to play with that a lot more. We're going to kind of treat it a little bit different than what we did the last couple of years. But she's going to kind of, I don't know what she's all going to do, kind of help explain a little bit better than what that I can of why it's so important to have biology. I guess that is. So Cassie, you want to take it over?
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
So yeah, no sales pitch today. Don't worry, don't tune out. We're really going to talk mainly about soil health and feeding the microbes, why it's important to feed the microbes, and it's important actually what you feed those microbes. So I got two options today, Kevin, Joe, Terry. We can go through biostimulants in general and talk about all of them that fit in this marketplace and really what they do and when to use them, or just really focus on humic sugar, Phycoterra. Up to you guys. I got two decks loaded and ready to go. So you let me know what you want to go through.
Let's do the whole thing so guys can get more knowledge. I guess that's what it is. This is some of our first year guys, new members. I think them trying to get as much knowledge as what they can on this. I mean, I think that would be beneficial for them. What do you think, Terry?
Yeah, please.
Joe?
Yeah.
We've got 45, 50 minutes here, pretty easy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll get started, and feel free ask questions throughout, either in the chat or just blurt them out, and we can stop and discuss, because there's a lot of information coming your way. And then I'll also share this, Joe, with you so you can distribute it to everybody in the group.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So what we focus on is utilizing the native microbes you already have in the soil. And we'll talk about why we take this approach. Kevin already hit on a little bit, putting out microbes, bugs in a jug, we'll call them. There's a lot of issues that come with that type of thing. So why are we not utilizing the microbes we already have? And how do we actually utilize those to put them back to work for us? And it was a great slide Joe showed you with how many microbes are in the soil. So if we look at actually how many microbes in the soil, in a single teaspoon, you can have 1 billion bacteria and 1 million fungi potentially in that teaspoon of soil in your field. However, what we've seen is that actually about 75% of those microbes that are potentially in your field are dormant, which means they're not actually functioning. They're just sitting there waiting for either the right habitat, moisture, temperature, food source to actually go back to work. So what can we do to actually leverage what you already have there? Just to give you a really quick background, I do work for a company called Phycoterra, where we specialize in the production and technology of microalgae. My background, I am a plant pathologist by training, but I've done a lot of work in focusing on the soil microbiome and how can we leverage agricultural products, mainly in this carbon space, to ultimately utilize and better our biology in the soil. I'll get more into Helier, but Kevin already mentioned we're based out of Phoenix, Arizona. We have 4 products. We'll run through that later, but all of them are based on feeding the native biology you already have, whether it be in your soil profile, around your seed, or actually on the foliar space, because we know microbes exist in all different one of these spheres. But today I want to focus on how do we actually use product types to optimize our biology, which ultimately, what Kevin said, optimizes your yield. So taking this approach of stacking different modes of actions in this carbon product space is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it that because they fall into, you know, those inoculants, humics, seaweeds, kelps, and microalgae, enzymes, etc. The backbone of all of these are carbon chains. So the easiest way to classify this is I'll call it a carbon product. So what we've found, not only in our research, but also what Kevin's doing, when we combine things such as sugars and humic acids, we're seeing synergistic effects in the field rather than utilizing them one by themselves. So how can we continue to stack these different mode of actions to achieve what we want in the field? And the first start is actually understanding what these products do. A lot of the times we get a lot of misconceptions on what these products do. They do it all. I think we've heard it, you know, those snake oil products, they can feed the biology, they can hold nutrients, they can be a fertilizer input. And really, when we get down to the bottom of that, they're really good at one thing. So I've given you a really sneak peek here table of where we can break down those product types and what the real mode of action is in the field. But we're going to actually dive into, if you're looking at products, how do you interpret that label? What are the questions you need to ask to actually get down to what's the true mode of action and what benefit you'll get in the soil? So we're going to take what I'm telling a little bit of a different view on carbon products. So just to give you an idea, what we're going to do here is we're going to clarify the marketplace. So walk through this biostimulant, biological carbon world. There's some regulatory changes that'll change the names. That's why I grouped them under carbon products. And then how do we actually move forward with utilizing these products depending on what solution we need in the soil? So to give you an idea here, here's just a quick chart of this biostimulant space in the market. So it's from 2014 till predicted 2025. The colors are dependent on the product types. So acid-based products would be like your humics, fulvic acids, your organic acids. Your seaweed extracts are labeled in green. Your microbial products are the orange, and then there's this other category coming out, which is red. So what we can see is the trend is growing. There's more and more products coming to the marketplace. There's more and more companies coming to the marketplace, which you guys have probably already seen that with getting more and more pitches from these type of companies. So it's more critical now than ever that we actually understand what these products do and how to properly characterize them so we're using them in the right manner to get results. So I want to quickly talk about what is an actual high-performing soil. We keep talking about soil health is key, and it's correlated to yield. But what does soil health really mean, and how can we measure that? So I have it broken down here into 4 different properties of a high-performing soil, with number 1 being soil structure. Soil structure is key when we're talking about only not decreasing compaction, but increasing your water holding capacity. So when you get a rain event, we can actually create a bank of water. So when we get in those drought conditions, that plant can utilize that, as well as utilizing drainage properly. So when we get a rain event, getting rid of the water quickly so we're not staying underwater, which can cause those anaerobic conditions in the soil like Kevin mentioned. Optimal active to passive carbon. So that's your organic matter piece. So your passive carbon and your active carbon are 2 different things. Passive carbon is really when you see your soil test, your organic matter is really showing you passive carbon. That's going to take a really long time to change. So over time, that number is going to change very slowly from season to season. The active carbon is not actually a measurement you're going to see on a normal nutrient soil test. That is a small percentage, and the active piece is critical when we're talking about feeding soil microbes. The active portion is actually the amount that is available immediately to those microbes to feed on. So it's important to have the active piece. You need a strong microbiome. And I mean that in terms of not only you need the microbes there, but you need a lot of different types of microbes, which we call diversity. And that's key in functionality, because we want to make sure we have those nitrogen fixation microbes, those phosphorus solubilization, but there's a lot of other properties happening that we need to make sure we have a strong community in general. And then lastly, the ability to have those available plant nutrients, but also utilize them so the plant can uptake those nutrients. And I would say in the last 10 years, the biological space has been more in the forefront of people's minds when we're thinking about managing our soil. However, we've really been focusing previously on the physical and chemical aspects. So we mean the soil texture, the aggregation, and the chemical piece being your fertility, CEC, pH. These are really important pieces of the soil. And like Kevin said, we need to make sure there are certain things right, like your pH, before we get started on managing your soil. But this biological space, the third leg of the stool, is really critical. And it's not really something we've been focusing on the last 10 years, but we see that as we're impacting the biological space, that we're seeing that correlated with soil health increases as well as increase in higher yields. So the key takeaway is to get healthy soil and to get soil quality, which are a little bit different. So it's the way your soils actually do their function properly, which we're talking about is producing a crop, is microbial partners are key. And there's a lot more data out there showing that the more microbes you have, the more diversity you have in your soil, the healthier soil is. So I want to take a minute and go through this biological space. And so how we define these biological categories is whether you're using a product that is either living or non-living. So if you're using something that's living, that's what we call those either bacteria or fungi you're adding into the soil. So these are pretty simple to identify what they're actually going to do for you. If it's a living product, all we need to know is what species are you putting out there. And I'll give you a species cheat sheet here in the next few slides, that if you know the species, we know what the role in the soil is going to be. When we get into the non-living category, this is where things get a little bit more difficult to understand what their mode of action is. So there's some questions we need to ask to actually determine what their function will be in the soil. The questions are here listed below. So that's the size. So like technically the molecular size. So how big or small is the molecule you're putting out? The charge, is it positively or negative charge? Because that'll be how it's interacting with those soil particles. The carbon to nitrogen ratio. So carbon to nitrogen ratio is key with if the microbes are actually utilizing that product. And then the lastly is called your macromolecule diversity, which is just a super fancy term of what's the nutrients in terms of food source. So those protein, lipids, and carbs that can feed those microbes. So these questions are not easy to answer. You're not going to necessarily find those on a label, but I'll also give you a cheat sheet on and define already products that are commonly used based on these questions we've answered and what they actually do based on size, charge, and macromolecule diversity. So to break this down, we can break it down into the most basic categories that we're seeing commonly in the marketplace today, with number one being your microbial food sources. So that would fall into your sugars, as well as what are called microalgae. So that's what we specialize here in Phycoterra. So both sugars and microalgae, their main mode of action is to feed the native microbes you already have in your soil. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what's the difference in those two products and what's the benefits of those two products. In addition, with microbial foods, when you utilize microalgae-based products, they also have indirect effects on promoting soil structure and impacting your water holding capacity. We also have products that are labeled enzymes, which do a specific reaction to soil. So for instance, if you're utilizing enzymes such as phosphatase, what it's going to do is take phosphorus in the soil and convert it to a plant available form. You then have your living biologicals, which are inoculants. Again, if we understand the specific species you're putting out, we can tell you exactly what they're going to do in the field. You then have your humic substances, which are your humic and fulvic acids. So the fulvic acids are the smaller in terms of actual size. So those can penetrate into the plant cell wall. So they're great at driving nutrients into the plant. Your humic acids are the larger size of your humic substances. So those are the ones that you'll put into the soil and will increase your CEC. They'll hold on to nutrients and help with chelation. And then lastly, you have your seaweeds and kelps or your macroalgae. So these are ones that you would, they harvest usually from the sea. There's some sort of extract. And their main mode of action is plant growth promotion and stress management within the plant. So to give you a quick cheat sheet on living carbon products. So if you're trying to utilize living carbon products such as fungi and bacteria, I've broken it down here to 3 of the most common fungi you're going to see in products on the market today. So normally you'll see something that's a yeast protein mix. You have a lot of trichoderma species out there, and then you have a lot of mycorrhizal species out there. So if we look at just the yeast protein mixes, usually those are great for nutrient delivery. They're going to help provide amino acids and NPK sources to the plant. If you're going to utilize a trichoderma species, these are beneficial fungi, and they really help plants in terms of plant protection. So some sort of defense against other fungi bacteria within the soil. Lastly, you have your mycorrhizae, which these actually make plant associations in the root. So they'll penetrate and actually be able to penetrate into the root, and they help with more water uptake, more surface area for that root structure, and also they play a key role in phosphorus uptake as well. We then have our bacteria. So you're going to see a lot more bacterial products on the market. And again, we can break these down into the 5 most common ones that we see in majority of the products. So those fall into your Bradyrhizobia, your Aspergillium, your Bacillus, your Pseudomonas, and your Aspergillus. So Bradyrhizobia, probably have heard of this before. This is nodule forming bacteria, and this helps with nitrogen fixation with legume plants. So probably a lot of the times that you've seen a seed treatment or something with soybean, you'll have a Bradyrhizobia in that package. Your Aspergillium is the same thing in terms of helping with the nitrogen fixation. However, this is specifically with non-legume species. You then have your Bacillus. So Bacillus are bacteria that again aid in pathogen control, but they also play a role in nutrient availability depending on the species you're putting out. Lastly, you have your Pseudomonas, which is really similar to Bacillus. So again, different pathogen control. It'll target different pathogens from Bacillus, but will also help with nutrient availability. And then lastly, you have your Aspergillus. So your Aspergillus will be ones that you would usually see probably in residue breakdown products. So if you're utilizing a residue breakdown that has a bacteria in it, usually has some sort of Aspergillus in that, and it's because it helps break down that hard to digest plant fibers such as that pectin, lectin, and cellulose that's locked up in that plant. So Kevin even mentioned that he's utilized some inoculants and he just hasn't seen results in the field. There's a lot of things that can cause this. So if you're looking at utilizing living bacteria, viability is the #1 concern you should have. So that means how much actual of that bacteria is in the jug when you receive it. There's a lot of things that can determine that, from storage, for instance, from actually getting that product from the manufacturer to your field. So temperatures, moistures, and UV can all reduce the viability of those products. So how was that product stored after it was made? How did it get transported to your field? And then how are you storing it in your own warehouse? A lot of these are temperature sensitive, so they cannot freeze or be hot, and a lot of them cannot be within UV stress. The second piece is, once we actually get them to the field, there's another level of competition. So we can actually get the viability to the field, then we have to have those microbes competing once they're applied to the soil. Once we put them in the soil, they need to have enough moisture to actually colonize that plant. They need to have the right temperature in the soil to survive. They need to be away from any UV, so light stress can kill off those bacteria in the soil. And then in addition, they're not only trying to colonize that plant, but they have to compete with other bacteria and fungi that are already present in the soil. They're competing for room because there's only so much room in the soil profile, but they're also competing for the resources to survive. If you have questions on this in terms of once you get a biological product to your field, there are labs that can actually test that product and give you the viability count. So they return that in CFUs so you can compare what the label says to what the product is when you receive it. Another quick test is a smell test. If you open it up, smell it. If it smells dead, maybe start asking some questions because usually that's an indicator that something might be off. And the second thing you need to think about if you're utilizing living biologicals is compatibility mixing. So can you actually mix that with your starter fertilizer, your wide drop pass, et cetera, however you're applying that, because usually they're sensitive to pH stress and those chemical stress. I mean, just think it's a living organism. So if we dumped you in a vat of chemicals, can you survive? That's a question we need to ask with these biologicals as well.
Yeah.
So
We got two questions before we get too awful far. When you may be getting ready to cover it, but number one is, can you measure active carbon? And then the second is related to it. What's an example of active carbon versus passive?
Yes, so you can measure active carbon. So I have a sheet at the end that gives a lot of soil tests that you can do to measure soil biology specifically. So there's a test called POXC, P-O-X-C, and that will tell you how much active carbon you have in your field. So the difference between the two is the passive carbon is going to be the total, right? The total organic matter you have in the soil, both living and dead. The active carbon is a really small fraction of that, anywhere from 5 up to it can be 20% of the organic matter. So that's going to fluctuate. You'll be able to measure that change within a season. So if you do that test, you'll see that changing radically depending on how much microbial activity you have, the temperature fluctuations, and the moisture fluctuations, where your organic matter is going to stay pretty consistent from season to season. It's going to be harder to impact. Where the active carbon, you can measure that after you make a change in terms of adding a product to your soil or changing an agricultural practice. You should be able to see that change in your active carbon pretty immediately within, a month's time.
Yeah. Cassidy, I forgot to tell the new members that these meetings are recorded, so you don't have to keep notes as fast as, as drinking from a fire hose here. So
yeah, and we'll provide this PowerPoint to you because there's a lot of cheat sheets that go through all this and has the POXC test on there too that tells you what those do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on the living inoculant side before we switch into utilizing the native microbes you already have in the soil? Good, okay. So I'm going to move into talking about feeding the native biology you already have. So this is a different look and really, I think something pretty new to agriculture today. We've been thinking about how do we add in bacteria, et cetera. So how do we actually feed what you already have? So I'm going to give you some options here. The first is I'm going to talk about microalgae, which is pretty new to the market. We released this product in 2020, 3 years ago. So the idea here is, can we provide a balanced meal in terms of proteins, lipids, and carbs to feed the native biology you already have? So I'm showing you here on the left is taking just a typical ag soil. So going back to, if you remember what I said in the beginning, about 75% of the microbes in your soil are dormant, which means they're not actually functioning. So what we did was take that typical ag soil with no treatment, plate it out, and what we want to see is natively what microbes are growing in your soil. So what we're looking at here is there's only one bacterial colony. So there's really limited microbial growth and happening in that ag soil. We take the same exact soil and we treat it with Phycoterra. So we add in a liable carbon food source to feed the native biology. And what we see is we increase the abundance. So we see more bacteria and fungi. But the second and the biggest piece is diversity. Again, we want to feed the entire microbiome. So the different color shapes and sizes here are telling you that we're feeding different species and genus of bacteria. And that's key when we talk about functionality, because we want to make sure we're feeding those nitrogen fixations as well as those phosphosolubilization, et cetera. The second indirect effect we get is what's called EPS. So EPS is talked a lot about when we talk about soil microbiome. And all that is a biological glue. So you can see it physically on this screen. They're natively secreted already from bacteria. And they play a critical role in soil structure because the biological glues actually glue your soil particles together. But they also hold moisture for those bacteria. So what we see is that we can increase this secretion of EPS, which leads to soil aggregation. So if you look on the left test tube, that's the same exact soil as on the right. So we can see physically those soils are different, and the only difference is feeding those native microbes, increasing the secretion of EPS, which physically clumps those soil particles together. And I'll show that in another way. So we're looking at different soil types here, everywhere from a clay loam down to a fine sand. So the first test tube you're looking at is just the typical ag soil with no treatment, and then feeding the biology with a Phycoterra at a 1% solution and 3% solution. So regardless of your soil type, we can increase the abundance and diversity of those microbes, which increases EPS, which drives soil aggregation, which is critical for water management, so being able to penetrate that water into the soil profile, but also helping with reducing compaction in the soil. And then from a water management standpoint, water holding capacity is key. So when we get into the mid-season to reduce rains and drought-like conditions, holding water in your soil is key. And we do that through microbial activation as well as soil structure. So what we've seen in our research is as you build these microbe communities over time, we can increase our water holding capacity up to 10%. So we're showing you this from a really heavy soil on the left to a lighter soil on the right. And we might be thinking, well, why do you have a negative response in the heavy soils? So if you think about those soils, it's when you get a rain event, it just sits there on top. The water is moving horizontally with the field instead of penetrating to the root zone. So even with those really heavy soils, we're able to break up that compaction layer and then drive that soil down or that water down into the soil profile. But I want to get a little bit more into the difference between feeding microbes sugars versus a microalgae versus a humic or seaweed product. So how do we actually know how we're feeding the microbes and how they're responding? So to do this, we have to break it down into what we call macromolecule diversity, which is just a fancy word for how much food does that product actually had to feed your microbes, and then breaking it down into nutrition. So how many proteins, lipids, and carbs. So just like human nutrition, we need a well-balanced meal, so do your microbes. So how we do this is we take different products that either feed microbes or maybe have a misconception of they are a microbial food source. So we have your molasses-based products compared to a humic and fulvic acid, compared to a seaweed-based extract, and then Phycoterra, the microalgae. So the number one question we need to ask is how much actual food availability is there in the product? So we see that the highest amount of food available for the microbes comes at the microalgae at 92 grams in a liter of food versus molasses at 74. So molasses does have a lot of food. So we know it can feed microbes. But the question is, how well does it feed the microbes? And we can answer that by how many proteins, lipids, and carbs. So if we see molasses, it has 60 grams of carbs, which is the majority of the product, versus Phycoterra, which is proteins, lipids, and carbs from 24, 21, and 44. So why that matters, and I'll show you in the next few slides, is that when you have majority a carbohydrate-based meal, you're not able to get the diversity response in the microbiome, meeting the different functionalities. So you can only feed one or a select few species of bacteria. So you're not going to see the soil health benefits like you would see from a more well-balanced meal. So what we do at Phycoterra is comparing it to feeding, if you fed your kid a bowl of sugar versus feeding your kid a turkey sandwich. When you feed your kids a lot of sugar, you'll see a quick spike in energy and then they'll crash. versus feeding a turkey sandwich, they'll have that sustained energy for a long period of time. We can see that in the same with microbes. We feed them in the soil molasses or sugar-based products. And what we see is at 2 days, we see a spike in activity and then they drop off. Those communities are gone after about 2 days. When we feed them Phytoterra, what we see is a steady incline of microbes for about 30 days and then a slow decline. So we're not getting that quick jolt of energy into the system, but a more long maintenance to feed those microbes for longer periods of time to give you functionality. And then really quick to hit on humic and fulvic acids. Those are great at other things like we talked about, driving nutrients in the plant, salt buffering, CEC, but we can see they're not a food source because there's only 7 grams of food there. So to show you that visually, we have broken this down into microbe plates. So to walk you through this is we want to see natively what's growing in your soil. So we have your untreated control, which is taking soil and plating it out and seeing natively what's growing in it. We have your Phytoterra, we have molasses and seaweed. So feeding those soils these different types of food sources. So what we can see is when you feed the soil Phytoterra, you get that abundance and diversity response, which is shown by more of the dots on the plate in the different colors, which if we look at molasses and seaweed, we do see the abundance. So we see that spike, that growth. However, we don't get diversity. So we can only feed a select few microbes, which will not give us that functionality in the soil. And then we see the same with humics. So on the bottom, we have, again, just the normal soil, what's growing in it. The right is adding in humics that actually has some living microbes in it. And we don't see a difference in the normal soil versus adding in the humics. When we add in the Phytoterra, we start to see that abundance and diversity response is on the top right. So again, going back to humics are great at a lot of things, but they're not a microbial food source. So synergizing those with food sources are key to see that synergy in the field. And then this is one that we showed Kevin last week. So this is pretty interesting in terms of actually taking specific species of microbes that we know are in your soil, and let's feed one of them a well-balanced meal of proteins, lipids, and carbs, and let's feed the other one sugar, which is just carbohydrates directly. So I have 2 different really common types we all know about, Pseudomonas and Bacillus. So these are usually found in everyone's soil at a high abundance amount. So what we were trying to determine is Phytoterra really a better food source to feed those microbes? But not only just feed them, but can we feed them and get higher amounts of those microbes in the soil faster? And can we maintain those communities longer? So walking you through the Pseudomonas on the left side, what I'm just showing you is this green chart is a Phytoterra feeding and the orange chart is a sugar feeding. So the first thing you should notice is that with a Phytoterra, we can obtain a lot higher amounts of that bacteria in the soil compared to the sugar at 24 hours. We then start to see the sugar increase. However, it never reaches that same amount of the Phytoterra feeding. And then after 72 hours, we actually start to see the sugar start to decline. It's because those microbes have already eaten up all that carbohydrates and there's nothing left for them to feed on, and they're starting to decline, which is different from the Phytoterra, where we actually continue to see increase at 196 hours. And we're seeing the same trend here on the right with the Bacillus species. So here we have 2 different rates of Phytoterra, the dark green and the light green. And then the yellow is your glucose or your molasses-based input. So it's the same exact functioning we're seeing. With a well-balanced meal, we can get higher amounts of that bacillus in the soil and maintain them for longer periods of time versus a sugar source. Kevin, was there anything else in addition to this that you wanted me to add that you learned about last week?
Do you have our slide?
I do.
Yeah, show that one. That'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I have both Kevin and Brooks' slide from the testing we did in his field this year and in Brooks this year. So we set up 2 trials where we split the field, adding in the Phytoterra. Brooks played his 2x2, and Kevin, did you do 2x2 or in furrow with this one?
That was 2x2.
So at a quart an acre. So what we're showing you here is the actual microbial populations in their soil. So on the left side, these are two different soil samples. So the right side of the field and the left side of the field. And the first box is just Kevin's soil with no treatment. The right side is we did the Phycoterra application, and what we saw is just with that microbial feeding, adding in those protein, lipids, and carbs, we were able to increase Kevin's microbial populations by about 3 times. So he's having 3 more times microbial activity in the soil the same time as that on the left. And we saw similar results for the right side of the field, where the untreated control is that first box. The second box is your Phycoterra, and we got about a 2x increase. So there's 2 times more microbial activity in the field 2 weeks after feeding those soils Phycoterra. And to visually show you what that looked like, so these are actually plating out Kevin's microbial samples. So the left is his untreated side of the field. So we're seeing really great microbial response. However, when we still add that Phycoterra in on the right, we can see that there's a lot more microbial activity and diversity with just adding in that Phycoterra. And then we saw this, go ahead.
Just a question. So did that, excuse me, how did that translate to yield or soil health? Did you track that as well?
So I don't know where Brooks, what his yields was. And I need to ask him that, but as you can see, we have a little bit more biology than what he's got. I'm thinking in this field here, this was 360 bushel corn, 370 bushel corn. And I don't know where, do you remember where he pulled this one at, Cassidy?
This one?
Or where you pulled it? Yeah. Was it by his grain bins?
This one was on the upper bottom, right? Lower
Okay.
bottom.
Yeah, I don't know what that field did. So I'm guessing, when we talk about the biology, the recruiting or the numbers game, that's why I say it's so important. I'm guessing we were probably, in that field there, we were probably 40 to 50 bushel better than what he was. But I'm not for sure. I mean, he's not on. He can't answer that. But that's what I'm saying. It's a numbers game. The more you got, and if you keep them fed, should translate into a higher yield. But I'll see if I can get a hold of Brooks and ask him I'll ask him right now what that yield was where you pulled that sample.
Okay. And lastly, do you sell into can you put your product into Canada yet or no?
Yes, we actually have a sales rep in Canada, and I'll show a slide too. I think Darren's on the call. He is our sales contact, so you can contact Darren and he can get you all set up.
Okay, thank you.
So we did the same for Brooks. We did a trial in his irrigated corn. So we're seeing the same results. Again, Brooks' baseline microbial activity is lower than Kevin's. So we can see that just by visually looking at those plates there on the left. You can see there's not a lot of microbial growth happening in those fields. We treat them with Phycoterra. And again, we saw in one portion of the field, about a 3x increase in microbial activity, and on another about 2x increase in microbial activity. And I think that's a good point is, yeah, great. We're seeing the activation. We're seeing the mode of action work in terms of feeding those microbes, increasing abundance and diversity. But the whole goal is to, of course, get yield and ROI within one season. But it's a long-term journey as well with soil health. So I'll show you, there's a few things we can do to track that. If you're looking for tests to track your biology in your field, there's a lot of tests out there you can do. So here's just a snippet of tests that you can do to actually track that over time. And depending on the product you select or the agricultural practice you do is depending on which test you should select. And what I mean is that the speed of response. So you see on the right where I have changes daily, monthly, and some over an entire season. So if you're choosing a product that you know you should see a biological change in 2 weeks, then maybe look at something that changes daily. If you're looking at a practice that's going to take a season, 2 seasons, or 3 seasons, start looking at these things such as your water holding capacity and your soil aggregation and track those over time so you can start to actually track how healthy your soil is. So there's a lot of options available out there depending on what you're doing and what you're trying to look at. CO2 burst test, which is like your Haney test, is probably the most commonly known. It gives you great carbon to nitrogen ratio, and then it gives you a soil health score at the end. That's a bit of a arbitrary number because let's say you got a 7 on that test. Does that mean you have a healthy soil or not? We can't really tell you that. It's a baseline for you to track. So baseline your fields. If you know you have one field that has a healthier soil, do that across multiple fields and start to develop your own baseline and changes over time. There's other things such as the active carbon test, as I told you about. So it's your MACC test, POXC, where you can measure actually how much food's available in your system. You have your water holding capacity and aggregation tests, which are indirect benefits of soil health. So these are not actually going to tell you the biology, but if you have better biology, you're going to have better soil aggregation and better water holding capacity. So you should see those changes happening. And then I'll also share this. There's a great article on soil health assessments that go through all the different sort of biological soil health assessments you can do and how to actually take the soil samples and when to do those as well in the field, whether that be winter, spring, or mid-season. And then the last thing I'll leave you here with is really starting out with a solution in mind, knowing your field, knowing your limiting factor in terms of the biology. So taking that soil issue you have, whether it be nutrient leaching, dormant microbes, your plants aren't uptaking, and then actually understanding the solution you're trying to achieve. Based on that, then you can start selecting products or practices to actually change those issues you're having with the soil. So here we just have a really generic subset of soil issues you may be seeing, some solutions to those, and then some product choices, whether that be adding in humic and fulvic acids for nutrient leaching or volatilization. If you're seeing low microbe activity in your soil, you should be adding in food sources or other biological products. If the plants nutrients are unavailable, that then goes back to looking at food sources, utilizing those microbes, and then abiotic stresses versus temperature and soil moisture. So just to give you an idea of how should you look at these soil issues, and then how do you use that to actually select the inputs that you need. So with that, I will finish just on a summary really quick. So like I showed you in the beginning, we're seeing increases in the biological space, more biostimulants, carbon products are coming to market, and more are going to be coming to market. So understanding the foundation of what these products really do will help you decide if you really need to start utilizing them in your field. And it's really hard to get that information. So find a trusted consultant, that be your agronomist, a CCA, somebody in MACC group to help you understand what these products really do and clarity on their mode of action. And always starting with an end goal in mind, because there's a lot of options. So know what specific solution you're trying to solve before you just start throwing all these different products out there, which also means tracking them in a way to see if they're actually working. Focusing on blending, which I think Kevin promotes that pretty well within this group, is we see better synergies with these types of products when we blend them together based on their mode of actions. So with that, if there's any questions, I am happy to take those. And then I will let Darren have 2 minutes to introduce himself and give out his contact information if you have any more questions on Phycoterra.
The answer to that question, I just asked Brooks, and he said that field was about 300 bushel corn. When we asked, whoever asked that question, what was the yield difference? Now, granted, there's other factors involved, but so 360, 370 to 300, which is still damn good corn, but you know, the moral of the story is the more biology we can get, it's going to help you.
Yeah, thanks for finding that out.
Yeah.
Cassidy, not necessarily to promote anything, but to just tell the guys, you've got a seed coating product, you've got I guess a product that can go in furrow, and then now you've got it's called FX, I think, can be foliar spread, right?
We do. So let me bring this up here. So we have now launched microbial feeding from start to finish in the entire cropping system. So to give you an idea, I know we talk a lot about soil health and the microbes in the soil, but there are microbes around the seed, there's microbes on the leaf that are critical, and there's microbes on your residue that are critical. So now we have a food source to feed the entire season. So we have Phycoterra ST, which is our seed treatment, it's a liquid microalgae seed treatment that you would apply directly to the seed as an overtreat or with your treatment you're going in with. We have the Phycoterra, which is the soil applied product. So about a quart an acre application, which can be applied pre-plant broadcast, 2x2 info or post-emergence. We have Phycoterra FX, which is our foliar line. So again, all of this is microalgae based, but different formulations. And the idea with the foliar is with your fungicide pass, we can actually feed those microbes on the leaf surface, which we know are critical for stress. But also it's a bit of, we're finding like, we all know now that our brains and our guts are connected with microbes and talking. We are finding that the leaves and the roots are also connected. So it's able to tell them, hey, I need phosphorus from the leaves, and it'll go down and talk to the roots, and microbes are critical in that signaling, which is really cool. And then the residue is after harvest, a quart an acre applied across the top with whatever your fall program is to help break down that biomass by around 26%, get those nutrients back into the soil. And the biggest thing we see with that is there's warmer soil temperatures come next spring, about around 5 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, Cassidy, these guys start using these products, and most of us look at 1 year as a guidepost for yields. What are we going to see? It's probably going to take more than 1 year, right around there.
So I'll pull out our results. These are averages from 2019 to 2022. So everything I'm showing you right here is one season. So what we want to focus on is, because we understand you need to make that ROI after one application. So what we focus on is getting the ROI and that yield increase after one application. However, to continue to build soil health is a long-term thing. So that's going to take multiple years of use to start seeing those impacts and those changes on that water holding capacity and that soil aggregation. So what I'm showing you here is corn and beans. So on average from 2019 until 2022, these are locations all across the US and Canada. We have an average ROI of 5 to 1 on corn. That's around 12.5 bushel. And with soybean on average, we saw around 6 to 1 and around 4 bushels. And then wheat was around 4 to 1 with 4.1 bushel increase after one application for one season, which generally with the Phycoterra soil applied product, we recommend around a quart an acre.
Any other questions?
A quick hypothetical question. If soil biology, let's just say, is declining as you go through the season, if we even added this into let's say a second wide drop, would that be a benefit?
Yeah, so this is something Kevin and I have been discussing is, when is the best time to feed based off the program, the MACC program, and then how often? So that's some things we're going to look more into this year. Majority of the work we've done at our level has been around planting or around that V6 side dress application. We have looked at stacking the different products, and I mean like our seed treatment with the in-furrow or our seed treatment in-furrow and foliar, but we have not looked deeply into the soil applied feeding multiple times this season. So that's something that hopefully we can get trials out with Kevin this year and really understand how much can we feed and still get a benefit in terms of ROI.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, so we sit there and we think about growing a crop, and this is this is to help, everybody deals with aborting kernels, and we get into that R2, R3 stage. And that is where we lose the most yield other than planting, the emergence and stuff. But you sit there and you think about it, we're expecting everything to do all the work from our last Y drop at V10. So we're basically going 2,000 GDUs without amping anything up after that in the soil for a biology. And that's when we were talking about, maybe this will be something if we apply it, if we can get 20 days out of it, maybe come in at R1 or VT and try it, and maybe that will be enough to get us through, that R2, R3 stage of aborting. I don't know. That's what's going to be interesting. We're going to try that to see if we can help save some kernels through the hot pollination time and the kernel abortion. So I'm excited to try some trials this year, after that V10 application, just to see if we can stimulate the plant enough to mitigate some of this abortion on the kernels.
Darren coming on.
Yeah. And if you want to look more into it, we do have on our website, we publish all of our field trial data by crop. So if you're looking for specific regional data, anywhere from our seed treatment, soil applied, foliar application, we have all that loaded on our website. So feel free to check it out. And it's pretty nice. You can filter by either your region or the product you're looking at.
Do you have any data as far as like people applying it through drip tape, like irrigation drip tape?
Yeah, so we not only focus on corn and beans, but we do a lot of permanent crops, etc. So we have quite a bit of data on running that through drip and micro sprinkler irrigation.
Okay.
And it's no problem. So the microalgae, it's not an extract. I don't think I talked about this. The product is not an extract. So you're actually, if you bought a thing of Phycoterra, it's going to look like a green smoothie. It's the entire cell of microalgae. And we do that because one, all those protein, lipids, and carbs and the goodies are encapsulated in that cell wall. And think about it kind of like a slow release fertilizer. Those microbes have to penetrate that cell wall, break it down to release those microbes. So we get that longer feeding over time as well. But that being said, the cells are extremely small in size. So if you took around 6,000 of the microalgae and put them in a single file line, it'd go about 1/4 inch of distance. So no issues with clogging, sprayer nozzles, drip tapes, micro sprinklers, etc.
Okay. And that research is on your website too?
Yeah, majority of it's on the website. If there's something you're looking for, feel free to shoot me an email and I can pull you some exact data if it's not on there.
Okay. Thank you.
Darren, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. If do you mind to put that slide up so that they can see the contact information anyhow? But Darren Blank with Helier, and my role here is just to be a clearinghouse for you guys. If you've got any questions regarding the Phycoterra, the FX, the seed treatment, or the Phycoterra itself, you can give me a call, and it's just one number that you can call, and I'll go behind the scenes and get the answers. If I don't have them, I'll get with Cassidy or whoever may be in your direct area. So just want to be a service to all the MACC members and be able to answer questions on an efficient basis. So anything at all that you have regarding Phycoterra, please feel free to give me a call.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions on Phycoterra? You got the chief PhD on right now, so she can tell you.
I got a question, if you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
Does anybody know like how many pounds of bacteria or microorganisms are in like an acre of soil?
So it's going to be dependent based on soil type, moisture, etc. So we know how much the potential is to harbor. So when we went back to that teaspoon can have 1 billion bacteria and 1 million fungi, we know it can withstand that much. However, it's going to be really dependent on your location, your cropping systems, moisture, pHs, etc.
Okay. I guess I was just thinking, like, I mean, I haven't tried your product. I'm assuming it obviously works, but like there's so many, like a quart per acre just seems like such a minuscule amount to feed that many organisms. But I don't know if it's like a compounding effect if it gets it primed and then it just keeps going, or I guess I was just curious on that.
Yeah, that's a great.
So Cassie, kind of explain what we were talking when we were out there about, because we said, well, why don't we go ahead and throw a boatload out there and tell them what you said about the nitrogen we could be burning up.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
there's a few things here. So we've done the research in terms of rates to really dive into this of, should we go be pulling out gallons and gallons? And we've even put out 8 gallons of Phycoterra to see if, hey, you can better. And the answer is no. And so there's a few things here. It's because, again, the soil can only harbor so much microbial activity, and then it's not going to be able to do that. And they're going to start to die off. However, there is a lot of people talking about how the microbes can get lazy. We think we can overfeed them to get lazy. We're still trying to understand that, but I think a bit of it has to do with this carbon to nitrogen ratio. When we look at soil tests, a lot of times they say 10-to-1 is the carbon to nitrogen ratio you have. Well, why is that? It's because what microbes can actually break down. So microbes need a food source and they need an energy source. So once you get more carbon to nitrogen ratio higher than that 25-to-1, microbes start to take in nitrogen and hold them for themselves. So that's when you start to see nitrogen tie up in your soil. So they'll start scavenging your soil, eating up all the nitrogen, and your plant can't uptake it anymore. So my fear is if we go out there and feed and feed and feed and feed and feed, that potentially we can start tying up your nitrogen because those microbes are going to need it to survive. And we're going to throw off that carbon to nitrogen ratio. That's going to be dependent from field to field. So Kevin and I have talked about maybe we need to spike a little bit of nitrogen in if we continue to feed, but we need to understand that a little bit more. But what I say with a quart an acre, all the results we've done so far is at that quart an acre. And I know it sounds like very little, but we've looked at 2 quarts, which we still see benefits, don't get me wrong, but across the board, we see the best effects at the quart an acre. And how it works is it's that slow term feeding. So they have to break down the cell wall. The cells are leaky because we pasteurize them, we kill them. So when we kill them, it pokes these microscopic holes in the cell. So they're going to leak really slowly. But once you put in the soil, the microbes will start chewing on those cells and really breaking them open. So we're going to get a slow release. So we're going to get a slow incline in microbes. So think of it like a really, like a hill, a small hill. So we start to see this slow incline in microbes and how bacteria can replicate within 10 minutes. I mean, they're really fast, turning over. So what we also see is as these microbes die, other microbes feed on their dead excretions and their dead bodies. So it's that feedback loop where we continuously see them feeding off each other. So it's a little bit of that ignition into the soil profile, but they start to, as they increase the populations, feed off each other's secretions and feed off literally they cannibalize each other a little bit. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, in other words, I mean, it's going to be a fine line. Kind of like what we see when we over nitrogen the crop, the yield goes backwards. So we're going to have to, do testing on each other's fields, or everybody's got to do their own testing to see what that fine line is. I mean, we're going to try it. We're going to run high rates just to see. I mean, I always say this: you don't learn till you kill a crop. Something. So, You know, we're going to have spots out there where we're going to feed all the way from planting, you know, run in furrow 2x2, first Y drop, second Y drop, and then come in maybe at tassel and try and maybe we do kind of overrun it. We don't know, but you know, that's the only way you learn is by going to the extremes and then backing off, my opinion.
Any more questions for Cassidy? If not, we'll break for lunch. Any closing statements, Cassidy? I guess you finished up.
Yep, no, I'm finished. And if there's any questions that come to mind, feel free. You can email them to Darren, myself, or Joe, and happy to answer any questions on the biostimulants or Phycoterra.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Guys.
Cassidy.
Joe, you want to break for lunch then? Got
Yeah,
anything else? Yeah. What about 30 minutes?
something like it.
Yeah. Can you eat in 30 minutes, Joe?
I can. I have done that. Yes.
We're not going to give you much time today. You're going to get this meeting carried on. So, all right, guys, we're going to leave it on. If anybody wants to ask questions during lunch, feel free. But in most cases, most guys will be away from their computers. So,
Yep, ask anything.
yeah.
Time.
Think we got all our Canadian members on today, so you might want to know how cold it's going to get up there, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they could keep that to themselves.